notes back over. I like how I have two monitors, but I'm doing everything on one. Okay, so we just got done talking about Scotty. Do you guys have any more notes to add to Scottie Pippen Game 6 with a bad back? Corey, you want to give your thoughts on that situation?
Well, I guess for me, I didn't really know that he was as injured as he was. Um, I thought it was just like something minor, but he was actually, in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, and it's too bad because this whole documentary, I don't know. I mean, but I was telling the guys earlier, he finished with 8 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, and 1 block amidst all that. So he still had a halfway decent role player, I guess, which is basically what he was in that game. He was a decoy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people discredit a lot of things that Scottie Pippen was able to do. I mean, that team, they always focus on Michael Jordan, but Scottie Pippen was just as important.
And he remember he as we got to think all the way back to the beginning of this documentary. Um Scotty missed most of the season up until the All-Star break, and they weren't very good for a while, and he came back, so they desperately needed him. Do you think that with him pulling basically a Willis Reed, do you think that was enough to kind of somewhat vindicate him throughout the whole series or no?
I would say because it culminated to them winning the title.
Yeah, I think that it made up for some of the bad moments that they depicted earlier in the series. Like I said earlier, and he did it in the biggest game at that point, and it was a closeout game. And even though he had that back injury, he kept coming out there. He kept coming out there. There's a couple times he was brought back to the tunnel, and he could have just stayed there, but he just kept coming back out.
I
Can
think
we call that?
Go ahead.
Can we call that the Pippen back spasm game, like Jordan's flu game?
Pizza game, bad pizza
Or,
game.
that's right.
And you know what? His migraine game wasn't shit either. Because Davis had the best migraine game ever in sports.
Yeah. So we finally get to the last shot. After everything we saw all these years later, do we still? I mean, have you guys changed your stance? Did you ever think it was a push? Did you think it was? I mean, obviously Reggie Miller's was obviously a shove. Like he pushed him way off. But do you think that Jordan, everything we've heard, did he actually push Brian Russell or was it momentum?
No, he pushed him. He definitely pushed him.
Yeah, I disagree with that, and I watched I watched a lot of the replays of the video because it was something that was brought up on a lot of shows. And if you look at Brian Russell's defensive position, he's already turned his hips to his left and Jordan's right because that's where MJ was dribbling. And then so once he saw him close his hips out, and that's one thing that they teach you when you play organized basketball is you do the zigzag drill, right? So you got a defender and a ball handler zigzagging up and down the court, and the defender is supposed to, go heel to heel, never cross your feet over. Well, Brian Russell's position had him basically crossing his right foot towards his left, so he was already out of position by the time MJ went and crossed over to his left. So that's the biggest reason why I think that it wasn't a push off because it was a straight up crossover. Brian Russell went flying by and he hit the shot.
So you don't think that he touched Brian Russell's body at all to
I
make
think he
him fall
touched.
over like that?
I think he touched him, but I don't think it was. I don't think it was enough of a touch to be a foul. I don't think it was an egregious push. No.
Ben, what are your thoughts on what you saw?
Well, he described it perfectly. I mean, he knows basketball. That defensive positioning he had. As soon as you're crossing your heel, you got beat. Your hips are shifting, your shoulders are shifting, all your weight is going in that one position. Jordan stops on a dime and he swipes. And what's interesting about that one shot, we've seen it a million times. They showed an angle, like a floor angle, that I swear I'd never seen before.
New angle.
And that one angle shows that it's basically just a swipe. He barely even taps him. He just like this, like get out of the way, and then he pulls up and hits the shot. Like he did not push off. That's just he dribbled. He beat Brian Russell to a spot on the floor, rose up and hit the shot. It's legit.
JR, do you have any thoughts on that? I'll give mine after this, and then we can move on.
I think he pushed him. I think, but it wasn't hard because he already had his momentum going that way. It's kind of like when Pippen dunked on Ewing and walked on top of him. Pippen's kind of motioning. He motioned like he shoved him down, but that dude was already, his momentum was falling down. It's kind of like that.
You know, you're right on that dunk. That's what it looks like. It looks like he dunked and pushed him, but you're right. You could tell. But yeah, that's that is a new angle. And to hear Bob Costas talk about it, I don't remember if he talked about it in the documentary or he talked about it afterwards. But he said it's about the same as an usher ushering you to your table or into something where they have their hand on you, but they're really not doing anything. I always felt like he didn't push him, but in the back of my mind, I was like, maybe that's just me being a diehard Jordan fan because I knew it was me being a diehard Jordan fan. But I think last night was proof that, yeah, he absolutely put his hand on him, and they could have called it, but they didn't. But I don't believe that it actually was. He did enough to actually do anything, and it's just like we said last week. It's the momentum. It's just like Craig Elo. So Jordan was known for going one way and stopping on a dime and pulling up and shooting. That's just what he's known for. And if you think about the Elo shot, he was dribbling left and stopped on a dime and jumped straight up, and Elo went flying by. So I don't think it was a push that actually caused.
It was a push, but it wasn't hard.
One thing also that I like to watch during games is I like to see the defender's reaction during a foul or a non-call. And so if you watch closely, Brian Russell does not react. He doesn't put his hands up in the air and he's not complaining. Where was the call? The one thing that he's doing after Jordan hits that shot is he turns to the ref and he goes like this, because he's trying to preserve time, call the timeout so that Jerry Sloan can call a play, so that he can, set up the offense. So there was no negative reaction from Brian Russell himself, which to me is a telltale sign that he didn't believe that it was an offensive foul.
Yeah, because you're right. That's some quality shit right there, Brian. Because usually you see the entire team just go, and
nobody did,
and nobody did. That's a good point. So that was it. That was the shot. 20 minutes left in the episode. We'll start with Corey. After that shot, I have some notes here, and I want to add one more thing because we talked about Dennis Rodman earlier. I don't ever remember Dennis Rodman ever missing an important free throw. He had a terrible free throw percentage, but when he had to make them, it seemed like he always made them.
Mm-hmm.
And then always, again, that goes back to the question I asked earlier. Maybe he was really good at basketball, but I don't think he loved the game. Like he was just kind of like, I don't give a shit. It's the second quarter. I got to make the shot. I can just see him saying that, But when it's crunch nut time, whatever they were saying, like I always remember him making those free throws. But anyway, so there's 20 minutes left in this documentary because I looked at the clock. Was anybody wondering what the hell they were going to talk about for 20 minutes?
Well, I know what you're saying because you could tell that there was a lot left to go that they had to talk about. And so he makes the shot, but I don't know what I expected, but I know what I saw was interesting when they talk about, and that's probably your next topic is why the team broke up, right? So I'll let you go from here.
Maybe. Was anybody expecting something? Do you have any expectations of what you wanted to see?
I thought that they were going to cover, the business end of it. That was the end. And how did the band break up? And I brought it up in a previous episode where I fully expected them to cover that material, and I think they did. And the thing that really surprised me that we talked about before was that even though Jerry Krause, made it known at the beginning of the season, I don't care if Phil goes 82-0, he ain't coming back, that Jerry Reinsdorf actually, if this is true, Jerry Reinsdorf went and spoke to Phil and asked him if he would come back for another season because he had earned it. So, so I expected to see how the band was broken up after hitting the last shot and having that much time left in the show.
One thing that bothers me is the doc is very insightful, but how Jordan really never heard anything until now, and they're handing him the iPad. Look at Jerry Reinsdorf say that everybody's salary is expiring, and we can't pay everybody. We can't pay Steve Kerr and Ron Harper all this money. You and Pippen and Rodman, you want to come back in a 1-year deal. Phil Jackson too. Yeah, that's fine, but we're not going to have the role players that we would, because they're all going to demand higher salaries in the open market. So that made sense to me, that it was predetermined before, in the ownership's mind at least, that this was going to be the last dance. Like, I bought that, but it was weird to me when Jordan claimed no knowledge of that until they had handed an iPad, and then he hears Jerry Reinsdorf explanation about him talking to Phil Jackson about how Phil doesn't want to come back because the team's not going to be any good. It almost kind of sounds like it was preconceived in Jerry's mind. Like, okay, this is it. This is a business. We had a great legacy, but we're going to start shutting down, and I'm going to start forcing my hand here and here. And it kind of looks like this happened. Maybe it didn't really happen that way, but it did, because we need to shut down and we need to trade everybody. And like the last graphic, what is it? There are 5 guys that left the team. I mean, it's no longer the Bulls at that point.
So that was the very next topic. So we already heard your opinion on it. um, from what I saw, like, I wasn't quite sure what I was expecting to see. I mean, I've been talking about it for the last 4 episodes, what I kind of wanted to see. And by the time it was all over, I was disappointed that I didn't see what I wanted to see, but I wasn't disappointed overall. But to kind of back up on what Ben was saying, that it appeared to me that Jordan was hearing those things for the very first time. And the look on his face it looked like shock. And then it looked like maybe his brain was like trying to process after 30 years or 25 years or whatever the math is. Like, this whole time I was thinking one thing, and maybe I just never knew, or maybe it wasn't that. But then he's scrambling to say something like, well, that's not the case because of this, and this. Um, Brian, what are your thoughts on that scene when he's handed the iPad? Because he didn't do a Gary Payton laugh, which there's
No,
probably a meme out there where he's doing it already.
yeah, I think that he was genuinely surprised about what he had heard. I don't know that he was expecting to hear that that Reinsdorf had called up Phil and tried to, bring him back and see if, some of the key players would come back. What was very surprising, though, was that he was also asked a follow-up question to see if others would come back too, and then he claimed that if Pippen and Kerr and some of the other guys had gotten a chance to sign another 1-year deal to come back and try to win, the 4th straight, that he believed that they would. And so that's an interesting take, and that's one up for debate. But I think he was genuinely surprised and probably just didn't know that there was a private conversation between Phil and Jerry Reinsdorf.
Can you imagine if that was true? That he was really hearing it for the first time. I mean, all sorts of shit must be going on in his head because
Yeah, absolutely. And
he's
then
hated Kraus and he's hated Reinsdorf. You know,
yeah, and I think like they covered it too towards the end where, it was like, well, if you had the chance to go for number 7, would you have gone for number 7? And it's almost like he wanted to lace him up right then and there, and so it's like the what could have been was coming through his mind at that point.
what Ben?
One thing that really blew my mind is, sometimes the things that are most obvious are the things you think about the least. Is when I was watching about them talking about coming back for another, maybe one more. That could have been, if you think about it, that could have been their 9th championship in a row. If you go back through everything, and if he had never retired and he had come back for one more year, we could be looking at 9 titles in a row in the NBA.
A lot of people play that thought, and we talked about it last week. As huge of a fan as I am, I think that things had to happen the way they did for them
I
to get to
agree.
that point. And I
I
don't
agree.
think that the more I hear about the Houston Rockets and the research, yeah, they probably could have beaten them, but I don't know if they would have won again. And then he wouldn't have that hunger and that embarrassment of getting beat by the Orlando Magic and everyone talking shit that he just wasn't a
Yep.
baller anymore
Yep.
because he was.
It's a butterfly effect.
Yeah, it's the butterfly effect. Yeah, he was angry. JR, what are your thoughts of the iPad or whatever it was he was looking at that moment? What was going through your head?
I I think it was genuine. He was shocked, and I just think that shows an example of his relationship with Reinsdorf. He had Kraus and others kind of like do his dirt, but he had it. It's a business. He had it all laid out. The damage was done. And I don't know. I think Michael's reaction to it was genuine. I think what he said about, oh, yeah, if we kept him, they could have won in a couple of years. I don't know about all that.
Corey, what were your thoughts that scene?
I think Michael genuinely 100% wanted to go for a seventh title. And I don't think people really understand like his desire to possibly get that seventh title. But I think a lot of that was predicated on Phil Jackson's return, and I think that his focus should have been on Phil Jackson about how he was brought this information. So Phil Jackson knew this information and still ended up leaving the Chicago Bulls. And for him, he probably felt like he was betrayed.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too, because Phil knew. I mean, he asked Phil to stay, but what I also learned later, I think from Jackie McMullen, because Jordan was approached as well by Reinsdorf directly. And so he approached Jordan to come back, and he approached Phil to come back, and apparently Phil didn't want to do it because because of the Krause situation, and he was probably tired to think about it. Dealing with all of that, even from a coach, I mean, that had to have been a stressful as hell season. Like, you don't want to deal with Dennis Rodman again, deal with Scottie again. I think that Phil felt that they were lucky to kind of get out of that season the way they
Absolutely.
did,
And
right?
I agree with what you're saying. Things happen for a reason. Things happen. You can't just say if this, then that. You can't go back and fix things like that. I'm a total proponent of that idea. It's still interesting to think, though. It makes you think of things you don't normally think about. If they had come back that one more year and say they had made it through the East, they would have played a rookie Tim Duncan Spurs team in the Western Conference Finals. And now we're talking about a whole new NBA.
Well, yeah, because there's a big thing that we all forgot until after they were talking about it. The next season was a strike season. So that was a
Mm,
50
Yeah, it was
game
like
that was a
50 some
50 game
games.
season, and yeah, and they're all old, but they would have been rested, they would have been healed if they bring Scotty back or not. I don't know, because I don't think Scotty would have signed. I don't care what Jordan said. I
I
think
forgot about the
he
strike season.
believed that he could have brought them back, but I don't think that it would have happened because it's a different league. It had already became a different league. There's just too much money out there, and all those guys that left to go play other places, they didn't really do anything. Some of them were role players that did their role, but
They
you
would have
never
had
heard
to
from.
go. They would have had to go up against the Pacers again, and as hard as the Pacers
Yeah,
played in the '98 season,
yeah.
I
who
think
knows what
everybody
would have
that's
happened.
an excellent point. Like everyone forgot about that. I completely forgot about it till you just said it. We're like,
Yeah,
well, who would they have had to play in the West? Oh, wait a minute, the Pacers. Who
yeah,
went from
and
the East? Was it did
Yeah,
Indiana go? Who went from the
New York
East?
Knicks. It was the Knicks, and they
it
were
was
the
the
eighth.
Knicks.
They were the eighth seed that year too.
Yeah, the
Oh
Knicks
well,
was
what
the
happened to
eighth seed.
Indiana?
They got beat by the
The Knicks
Knicks.
beat them.
Yeah, yeah. But then the Pacers returned to the finals in 2000 for the whole
Right,
Kobe Pack thing. So,
right. They were the up and coming team in the East, man.
yeah.
That Pacers team was the real deal, man.
Phil just
But
wanted to take a vacation for a year, take off.
Yeah, I heard
That was it.
I heard Shaq today saying that he was monitoring that situation, and he said he's glad that they broke apart because they would have never got him with the Lakers because he went to ownership say this is the guy we need. He said don't bring in anybody in here that hasn't won anything. And he said like when Phil came in, they were like they were they were on that yes 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 because he had won some shit. My Siri just went off for some reason. How about Jordan and the poem? I have some thoughts about that. Do you think that
What's
poem
the poem?
in that ceremony maybe help the players, the teammates understand why Jordan was the way he was? Because I'm not sure what was in that poem, but I bet it was like almost like an apology to his teammates and thanking them for everything they've gone through. And I think when you have hard feelings towards somebody, even though you just won a ring, in my opinion, sometimes that's all it takes. It's like, all right, I get it now. I understand. I understand the tough love. You're good to me. You're good. You're good in my book. Like I'm wondering if that poem was never written and burned in a ceremonial way. What the players maybe I don't know if it changes anything what the players think, but maybe that moment changed a lot for his teammates. I mean, what were you guys' thoughts about that? And do you think it was kind of a cool thing? I mean, you never hear no shit like that. They'd fucking turn off the lights and burnt that shit in the trash like some hobos.
yeah, it was a cool story. And I think when you think about a poem or a song, you have to have some type of inspiration behind it. And Phil didn't ask anybody to really write a poem. He just asked them to put a few words on paper and say what you feel about the team. And then for Michael to put it in poem form, I mean, he had to have had a lot of inspiration, from his teammates and what they went through in order to do that. So um, I think it's a real cool story, and the way that they capped off, that three-peat, that's some pretty Zen master shit right there. So yeah, cool story.
Anybody have anything to add to that before we move on?
Yeah. I I like how Phil Jackson did that. Like it's it's one of those things where we didn't hear what the poem was that Michael Jordan wrote. We're not supposed to hear it. It's not for us. It was for the teammates. And like Michael Jordan said, he goes, "I'm not a poet." He's like, I just wrote what my feelings were, and you know what? He showed up during crunch time when it came time to that too, and it had more of an impact than anybody else wrote on the team. These NBA players, man, how good could they have wrote? What kind of stuff could have been that good? But he comes and he does that, and it's enough. It's enough for them to put it all together and then to light it on fire, and then they have that moment to where they can just put it to bed. It's finality, so that we can all move on with our lives, because it's all about moving forward. What's done is done. It's totally Zen Phil Jackson.
I agree. I think that was a nice way to end it. You could tell Phil's impact on Michael. I think, I don't know if that would come from him originally, but dealing with Phil all these years, I think that helped him with that poem. Be nice to know what it said, but like you said, it's not for us. But it's definitely a nice closure to the whole chapter.
It just definitely just see there was some method to all the madness, and then see that culminating that, this is why I, did what I did, and I just feel like you definitely can see that relationship was a little bit more deeper than just a coach and a player.
To hear Michael when they asked him about retiring, and you could tell he hated. He said, "I hated it. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to stop." I thought it was interesting, and it's almost like you never know what you got till it's gone type of deal. Because I think it brought him full circle with his retirement in 1993, where he didn't really. He felt like he had nothing else to prove, and so he quit the game. And now he wanted to prove. He wanted to just keep running it back like a pickup game of basketball. And now he couldn't do it. Now he really wants to stay, but the world has changed around him. And unless he wants to start over and rebuild, different coach, different teammates, it just wasn't going to happen. I don't know if any of you guys picked up on that or had any thoughts on that, but you could see, he was ready. He wanted to lace him up. And if he can go in the time machine and go back and do it, he'd do everything he could to try to play that next season. I mean, Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that we're kind of in that age range too now, where you start to see that you have less days in front of you than you have behind you. And so maybe it was just a lot of introspective, just thought going into, man, I got drafted in '84, and here we are, in '98, and who knows how much longer I've got left. So you see the change that came within him, between the two three-peats, where, and he even said it during the interview yesterday. It's that you have this young, energetic guy who is just all physical during the first three-peat, but then you have more of the mental, mentally strong Michael Jordan during the second three-peat. And so that comes with maturity and experience. And I think at that point in time, he was starting to see that, okay, we're getting towards the end here. And maybe he was just trying to hold on to whatever he had left.
And I might be getting a little off track here, but it reminds me of what the motivation factor Michael had, is that the slightest little bit of anything he could use for motivation. Like I I ordered sausage for my breakfast and you got bacon. It's a sausage day, and that's what I needed to win that game 7 today. You know what I mean? He just had that in him where he does anything. Karl Malone won the MVP. How dare Karl Malone win the MVP? How dare anybody compare Clyde Drexler to me? In the finals, and what he said about Gary Payton and how dismissive how dismissive he was of Gary Payton. it's just the whole competitive edge thing, man. I love it all.
Did anybody else laugh that you brought up Karl Malone when he was like, "I'm not saying he wasn't deserving of it, but you guys said that he got MVP. Okay."
Yeah,
It was almost like a challenge. Like the way he said that, I just started laughing. I was like, he was like,
yeah,
all right, we'll see.
yeah.
Did you guys like the way it ended? Did you want more? What would you have liked to have seen more? Corey.
I definitely, I mean, that's 5 weeks is really short, and I just wish that it was a little bit. I think some of the stories that was in there could have went a little bit longer, could have been more depth, but I'm satisfied with what we got. Um, but some of the other stories, just going back, not even just the end, just could have elaborated just a little bit more in detail about certain things because it just kept bouncing around different stories. And I was trying to figure out what year are we in, what season are we in, and then it bounces back to something else. And so, I mean, I'm satisfied for what we got, but definitely could have went in a little bit more detail and probably got a little bit more out of the show had they elaborated just a little bit on certain aspects of the story.
Were you distracted when you were watching the show? Because it's like if you're not like glued to it, you'll miss them do the year transition because they do it. It takes what like 3 or 4 seconds, and then all you look up, you go to the restroom without pausing it. You're like, what the hell just happened? Like, why is Horace Grant out on the court? Like, it's
Yeah,
easy to lose
yeah.
track of it. Brian, we have 9 minutes left, so hopefully we can wrap this up in the next 9 minutes because we're basically done after these final thoughts and final notes.
Yeah, I was happy with it overall. The thing about it is that what made me happy is that I got to see Michael Jordan in a more human light. And I want to tie Kobe Bryant into this. I've never been a Kobe Bryant fan until the end of his career because, as I had said before, he was the last of a dying breed because he was what I grew up watching in the 90s. He was that, and he crossed over into the 2000s. Um, I became more of a Kobe Bryant fan closer to his death because he was human. You saw him at the arena, you saw him with his wife and his kids, and he let people have access to him, more so than when he was a player. But you saw the human side of him because of the family. And that takes me to what I wished I would have seen more. We only got like 2 or 3 minutes of Jordan's, children getting an interview. And I'm sure that they had, long pockets of interviews, on the tape, but they decided not to use a whole lot of it. And who knows for what reason. But it would have been great just to get a little bit more perspective from his kids, because I think there's nothing more that humanizes a person more than their family and especially their children. So it would have been really cool to hear a little bit more from them because we got a lot of that from Kobe Bryant the last few years of his life.
Well, remember, this was the first time they were watching this as
Mhm.
well. So they were seeing a father that they were like, wow. But it would have been nice to see that contrast while we're at home. But I think we lose track of, wow, this was Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. This wasn't Michael Jordan, the person
Right.
outside of the game of basketball.
That's true. That's true.
Ben,
The more human side of Jordan, like you want to know more, but yeah, you remember Jordan has the last say on all this stuff too. And they don't talk about either of his wives, even his new one. And I think he's got new kids with his new
Hmm.
wife too. Um, and his sons, I don't know that I know that he had a daughter. There's
Yeah.
Jasmine Jordan. Like I don't know if I ever knew that. I knew that he had two sons because one of them played. I saw one of them play in college. I think one of them played at Illinois, and
yeah.
so I knew about them, but I didn't really have a problem with him not talking about that too much because the only thing you really need to hear about Michael, you didn't hear much about his brothers either. His brothers in there a little bit, but it was about Michael and his dad, and then Michael and the team, and everything else is just details. It's just fuzzy details because that's what Michael's about. He's like, I'm a player for the Chicago Bulls. We're trying to win a title, and this is my father, and that was his life.
Yeah, and none of those interviews were done at his house. They were all done at other people's houses, which I found out, I think, through one of the interviews that I saw by one of the directors. So it was a conscious decision to omit that. He's always been kind of private unless you watch Michael Jordan's, I think, Playground or whatever, where he actually has his kids in it. And I guess that's just always who he is. But that's a common thing you hear. Jay, what do you think, Jr.?
My critique. I mean, overall I liked it. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and I enjoyed it. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of like Jason Caffey, what's behind him, or Randy Brown, but I could have done without the BJ Charlotte Hornet game. The LaBradford Smith stuff was a little too lengthy for me. They cut those down a little bit and put in more of that, what I mentioned earlier, that Pippen led season where he led in all categories, and the Hugh Hollins. That was huge part of Bulls history where we got screwed. And I had mentioned to you, Jay, earlier, I was at Game 6 at old Chicago Stadium. And that would have been the clincher. The Bulls could have went to the finals. And that phantom foul call on Hubert Davis was just...
Wasn't that the semifinals? That wasn't the Eastern Conference Finals, right?
There was the semifinals. But they had a good chance, a solid to get to the NBA Finals, I think. And I think that's a big part of Bulls history that I felt it needed to be in there. And we could have omitted a couple other things, a few minutes here and there, to get that in there.
Yeah, I thought the same. There were some things that I wish we would have seen more of. To your point, they could have showed the phantom call, which if you go back and you watch it, even today, it's a 50-50 call, to be honest with you. And even though the NBA came out and admitted that it was a bad call, it's a 50-50 call. When someone's shooting a three-pointer and you run into them, even though the ball is long gone, half the time they call it, to be fair. I would have, like you were saying, I would have liked to have seen more of the team. Like, I don't need to see Jason Caffey's backstory, but for the starters, I would have liked to have seen, even if they spend 4.5, 5 minutes on Luke Longley, if they spend, 10 minutes on Ron Harper, because he had a very interesting career. He was jump out of the gym athletic and he had the injury, and then, fighting his way back, because they were all part of the starting five, because this was Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, The Last Dance. If it's going to be about that team, the Last Dance team, they should have spent a little bit more time on the players. I think we got to see a lot of, Randy Brown, which was kind of fun to see him. But yeah, I think they missed the point. And even when you saw the final credits, it was like 4 Jordan highlights, a different player. 4 Jordan highlights, another player. I was like, come on, man.
Was there any Brian Williams footage on that thing?
I saw one play. Yeah.
Because he had some
later in his
He was
life.
pretty good. And even Scott Williams, when they showed him the first time, I remember he was a shot blocking fool. One of the things, we only have a minute and a half left. I want to close on this. It's a good discussion, but we can't discuss, so you're just gonna have to listen to me because it's my podcast. Overall, the narrative, I think, was, this is my team. Scottie was, because you always hear them say, well, everybody needs a Scottie. Jordan wouldn't have won it without Scottie. Scottie can't win without Jordan. I think he wanted to show Scottie was good, but I think he showed more of his faults, so that at the end of the day, you could still see that I am the man. Scottie was good, but I am the man. And I think that all of his opponents throughout the finals, whether it was Charles Barkley or Sean Kemp, Gary Payton, his tough matchups in the Eastern Conference, I think he wants today's players to see that, don't sleep on these guys. These guys are really good too. These guys are legends. Don't think you guys have it all, because these guys were something special. So I want to thank all you guys for joining the podcast. This is it, 505. That's a wrap.
Thanks for having me. Peace.
Peace.
Nice meeting you.
Middle East.